Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today are Louis D'Souza and Anne-Marie Young. This is your Daily Dose of Happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Indeed we are. Welcome to another week of LOA Today. And we have a special guest joining us today. Her name is Catherine Chadwick. And Catherine has quite the background. She is a registered nurse, but she didn't stop with the nursing. She kept going beyond that. She developed some other skills, and she's going to tell us a story about how it kind of started when she was a nurse. It's going to be an interesting story. But she's a practitioner of applied positive psychology. That's going to be an interesting topic all by itself. She's a certified life mastery consultant. I mean, she actually has like this resume that would be too long for me to read, so I won't try to read the whole thing. Instead, what I'm going to do is just welcome her to the show. So, Catherine, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. How you doing?
I'm very well, Walt. Thanks for having me. I appreciate this.
Glad to have you. And now I touched on it from 10,000 feet. Give us the 5,000 foot view. Give us like your background.
Well, as you accurately said, I did start out in nursing. Absolutely. My first job out of college was working ICU, which is a bit like trial by fire, but it was, well, talk about valuable information, right? And valuable training. And I could actually see some of these energy principles at work, but we didn't talk about energy principles at that time, right?
Especially then, yeah.
Right. But you could see how some of it was in play, which was very interesting to me. And I started to delve more into the personal development and the exploration of all of this in the 80s. I was listening to Wayne Dyer and Eckhart Tolle on cassette tapes, right? People know what those are. So, right?
Just making us a little bit, that's all.
Right, yeah.
I've listened to a couple of those cassette tapes and Wayne Dyer.
Okay, good. But it's just been a progression as I've come along, and I really just love it. And the wonderful part now really is that with the technology opening up, so it's very much opened up, the research in neuroscience and epigenetics and, all of these other arenas, as you know. So it's just wonderful to have all of that at our disposal. And I very much use a lot of that in my work with people. I think as a nurse, I've always been a coach, and I love working with people in the reprogramming and developing, practices to, help develop those new neural pathways. And one of my favorite projects is the sunshine quotient. Ooh. And that's a term that refers to lighting gradients in photography and radiology. And I've applied it to people. In fact, it was interesting. It came to me pretty much as a download. People were saying to me at one point, like, oh my gosh, you're just so bright all the time. What are you doing? And I say, wow, I have a high sunshine quotient. And I said that a few times, and I thought, I've never put those two words together ever. And so I did a little research, and that's why I realized about the lighting gradients. And I'm like, oh, this makes such perfect sense. Because it does apply to people. We're light beings. We're radiating light all the time. We're broadcasting our level of vibration. And so I do work with people in what I refer to as the sunshine quotient mindfulness and breathing technique. I call it the training wheels of mindfulness, and it's just so simple. Because obviously when you take that deep breath in, you stimulate the vagus nerve. And that stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, the calming side of your nervous system. And if you add in the mental rehearsal of breathing in the sunlight, or light beings, let's bring in more. And when you feel that and can visualize that you're glowing from the inside out, and you can feel the warmth of it on your skin, it's very calming, and it's also very healing. And it's a wonderful practice for people to develop, to create the habit of being able to use the breath as a regulatory tool, right? So when you start to become anxious, you go, oh, the breath, right? So
I can kind of imagine back in the 80s when you were first exploring this, you probably didn't have many peers in your ICU setting who were on the same page. Am I guessing right about that?
Well, I didn't actually start working with the sunshine quotient until about 10 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And I realized when I was studying for the applied positive psychology that it was Barbara Fredrickson's work and her research
Oh, yeah.
that really confirmed to me that the project that I was working on was very viable. So I've expanded it and I keep using it. So it's really a fun project because it's so simple.
We haven't actually talked about her work very much, but give the audience just a quick overview of some of the major breakthrough type roles she played.
Well, it's interesting because, her the first part of her research was about how positivity opens up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the broaden and build theory, and to just keep moving with that. And the positivity builds upon itself. And her second book, Love 2.0, is a wonderful book. I think everybody should read it.
There are some tremendous contributions made within the relatively new field of positive psychology. Have you kind of been involved in that since like the beginning, like the late 90s, or did you pick it up later? Or
I picked it up a bit later. I started studying that on my own probably around 2012.
Okay.
As far as going specifically to the applied positive psychology part, right? Mm-hmm. I had been studying about positivity and the effects of that. And what I really loved is that I was already focusing on what was going well versus what was going wrong, right? Right. So the applied positive psychology for me was like, oh yes, this is a fabulous place for me to be.
Yeah. When you first get exposed to that, especially if you've been exposed to other energetic theories, ideas, practices, and so forth, before you get exposed to the positive psychology, when you actually read the stuff, you say, well, yeah, where has this been? This is great. I'm loving this. That's what my reaction was anyway. Like, oh yeah, I was so excited that the mainstream was catching on, because that's what I consider that to be, like an outgrowth of the mainstream.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'd imagine it was pretty much a similar kind of experience for you. Now, when you developed, and you're the one who developed the idea of the sunshine quotient as something to apply to humans. Like you said, it had other applications, but you're the first one who applied it to humans, right?
Well, it's interesting in that the practice of breathing in the light has been around for like how many thousands of years, right?
Right.
I mean, it's not new information, but using the term sunshine quotient and having a visceral and a visual concept to work with people with, I think has found to be very useful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You haven't done anything with actually measuring energy out of people, particularly when they engage in a process like that. This is more of a philosophical / theoretical approach. Am I right?
It's absolutely more of a qualitative versus a quantitative.
Sure.
Right?
Okay. Yeah. Good way to describe it. See, now there's the way the scientist says that. I love that. That's bad. So good stuff. So, all right. Well, this has been quite the journey for you because, like you said, you started off, as a nurse and you were listening to Wayne Dyer and you were listening to Eckhart Tolle. That was, by the way, was what I was referring to when I was saying that's probably not the kind of stuff that your fellow ICU nurses were all jumping on and saying, yes, oh yeah, we love that stuff. That was probably a little bit out there, right? I mean, let's be honest. Anybody who explores that stuff, you're a little bit of a different person, which is a good thing, but it's not your typical vibe. It's becoming more and more common. I mean, more and more people are latching onto this now, which I find to be very exciting. But
yeah.
But back in the 80s, that was a little revolutionary for that time.
Well, it was, and I didn't really talk about it too much. Mm-hmm. But when my children were growing up, I certainly wanted them to know more about it than what I had known growing up. And I think that was not only for my own development, but wanting to be able to have a broader vocabulary and a broader understanding of what's actually happening, right? Mm-hmm. And what's fascinating to me is that, now there's, as we mentioned before, about so much research being available, and that concept of that we think between 60 and 70,000 thoughts in one day And about 90% of them are the day, same as the day before and the day
Yeah.
before and the day before. So how many of us have been dragging those yesterdays around with us all
Mhm.
this time, right?
Sure.
And I think it's, something that people absolutely would be well served to be aware of, because all of these thoughts and beliefs have been handed down for how many generations. And I call it, acceptance of belief without evaluation. And not all of these beliefs and thoughts serve us.
Talk about that for a moment. We'll just kind of treat that as a little bit of a tangent, because I think it's an important tangent. The fact that we do spend so much time focusing on stuff that really doesn't serve us.
Right. Well, it is interesting because, the reticular activating system, the part of the brainstem,
Mm-hmm.
it helps the brain predict what it's going to look for.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I refer to it, it seems to me like it's like a synthesizer. And so it's also filtering information coming in.
Right.
And if it's not connected with what we're focused on and what we're thinking about, that information is pretty much set aside, is disregarded. And so then it goes in, and then the brain then uses the information that has come in, but it's also reinforced what's already been there, because that's what it was looking for in the first place.
Right.
And so that loop just starts going, going. And how long does the loop keep going? And so I think it's important for people to take the time to evaluate what it is they really want, and to have a vision and have some steps and some plans in mind, as far as keeping into that area that isn't already taken up by the loop going around and around, because that's how we make progress.
There's also another little tangent that goes along with it. It's a tangent to the tangent. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but there's a tangent to the tangent, which is that there are only 4 senses that get filtered through the RAS, which I always found to be fascinating. Apparently, smell doesn't get filtered through there, and I don't really know why. Do you have any knowledge or information about that?
I have not done any research on that.
Yeah.
I do know that there have been instances where I wish that the smell had not registered.
Yeah, I think we have a few of those. Yeah.
I'm sure everybody has, right?
So true. So true. I love this. So let's bring, go ahead.
Well, the other 10% that I like people to be aware of is that over 90% of health illnesses and conditions are lifestyle induced. And that's an important element. And I do bring that into my work. Obviously with the nursing, it's very important to understand how your mind influences how your body operates. Yeah. And how your thoughts and your words and your actions all have energy frequencies associated with them, and they affect your body physiologically. And it's important to know those things. That's
really good. I love that. So I'm going to bring Anne-Marie and Louie into the conversation, because they've been sitting quietly, as they usually do, for the first 10 minutes or so. And Anne-Marie, I'm going to go to you first. What are you thinking about when you're hearing this conversation with Catherine that I'm having a great time with?
Yeah, I mean, sadly I missed most of it because my internet went.
Well, there's that. Yeah.
So I'm like a bit gutted about that. But yeah, no, I mean, I think we all know that it's what you focus on is what you should focus on what you want. And certainly with regards to the health one, that kind of hit, sort of confirmed how I think, if you think you're going to be ill. I know, for example, my mum had a real massive fear about going into a home and getting dementia, and she ended up in a home with dementia. And I think that had a lot, one to do with the way she thought, what the fears on, what her focuses were on. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I know some people who've had really nasty diseases, but they've had such a positive outlook and just determination on getting better that their recovery has been amazing, and it's surprised all the experts. And so I definitely think there's something about how strong your mind and your positivity is and your focus, and how that controls your health.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's wonderful. And Louis, Now, this is where, Catherine, you have to understand, I'm probably going to be turning the mic over for a while here, but that's okay. That's part of what Louis' role here is on the program. So, Louis, tell us what you're thinking about. Oops, you're muted there. We're not hearing you for a second here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that works better.
There's so many things I could be touching base with Catherine. I don't even know where to begin. Basically, I wanted to ask you a little more about your own journey. What are the things or experiences, maybe inner experiences, happened that forged your life?
Oh, well, there are quite a few.
I thought there might be. That's why I wanted to dig.
So, my first ICU job, right? I hadn't been there that awfully long, and I bent over one day to pick up a piece of paper from the floor, and I couldn't stand up. Ooh. And as it turned out, the L4 vertebrae was all in pieces from stress fractures. Wow. And my sciatic nerve on the left was impinged quite badly. And that was about a 3-year window out of my life, in that I did go to Mayo Clinic and have a fabulous repair.
I've heard so much about that clinic.
Yeah. And, I would totally recommend it. I've been there twice. We'll get to that. And so, it was, my prescription after that was to wear a breast to hip back brace with a metal stays at the back and walk at least a mile a day for a year. Mm-hmm. And I went back to Florida. I hadn't been able to work, so I lost my car, I lost my apartment. I was sleeping on a friend's couch. But I had 2 bikinis and I had 2 back braces. And I went to the beach every day, rain or shine, heat wave or not. And I got up to 7 or 8 miles a day. And it was fascinating. I didn't care what I looked like, right? But I was
I can just see you in a bikini back brace in the rain.
Back brace, right? It was quite a sight, I'll tell you. But I kept meeting and seeing, some of the same people over and over, and I would go further, and, people were cheering me on, yay, and so I got very strong. But during that whole process, talk about a higher level of awareness.
There's nothing quite like a back or spinal injury to really show how much it can reduce your energy and how much, when it's fixed, it can replace your energy, or bring it up tremendously. Yeah.
But talk about focus and persistence, and all of those wonderful awakenings to move forward with. Mm-hmm. And so that fabulous repair, they had obviously removed all the pieces, took out a disc, took part of my pelvis, and made a fusion for me. And it was wonderful. It lasted 23 years, 2 natural childbirths, black belt in karate, building stone walls and all of these things. But I wore it out, and I went back for the bigger, better, and improved version 23 years later. And I have donations from the bone bank and rods and screws, and, and I still do beautifully well. I'm very active. So I have no limitations. So, but I think that all of that too is how
mental. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because the first time it happened, and I'm sleeping on this friend's couch and going through all of this, I'm like, oh, no, this is not going to be my life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
And it takes that level of decision in you to be able to move forward. Yeah.
Oh, no question. The other incident that was quite illuminating, let's say, is I had an allergic reaction that caused a complicated migraine, which was also known as a soft stroke. And it revealed an irregular circulatory pattern in this part of my brain right here. And I spent a little over 2 years, not consistently, but with a headache and thinking one thing, and a whole different sentence would come out. And not consistently, not every time. But I'm like, oh my word.
So you did many a Freudian slip.
Yes. So,
Freudian and Jungian and just about every other kind of slip.
And that was a real impetus to, okay, let's just keep finding this sense of humor in things, right? Because that goes a long ways, I do believe.
It's interesting to me. You were pointing to roughly the same area at the base of the skull where the RAS is located. Was that involved in any way?
No, because it was really up a little bit higher.
A little higher, okay.
And off to the side.
Okay.
Of course, it could be that my RAS is off too.
Well, it just occurred to me that you were talking earlier about the recorder aspect of the RAS that records and creates loops and keeps replaying the same thought patterns over and over again, and filters out certain things, filters in other things, and it just made me wonder if there was a direct connection going on there where you would create some sort of filtering that helped to create the condition, and then you create new filtering to uncreate the condition.
It's all very possible, right?
That's what occurred to me because the locations on your skull were so similar. I said, whoa, okay.
Yeah. It's all very interesting because I believe that anything is possible.
Mm-hmm.
What is RAS? Just so I'm in the loop.
The reticular activating system. It's part of your brainstem.
And what does that do?
That's what I was referring to, that filters information as it comes in.
Oh, that's a filter. Okay.
And then it helps to predict what the brain is going to look for.
Okay.
Yeah, the RAS, the example I love to give with the RAS is if you've ever bought a new car, which I know you've done a few times lately, and suddenly you see that car everywhere, and it's the same color, and it's the same model, and it's the same year, because your RAS has now allowed that to filter through into your conscious mind, whereas before it wasn't filtering through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The next thing I wanted to touch on, Catherine, was black belt in karate. Was it?
That was a fun, that was a very fun experience because I started when my son was 7. He wanted to take karate. So I took him a couple of times to the dojo to observe, and he said, yeah, I want to do it. I said, all right. So I played a lot of sports growing up, but I've never done the martial arts, and there's a lot of repetition. There's no immediate gratification. So my requirement is that you would, stick with it for a year to give it a fair shot.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I said, why don't you take a couple of days and think about that? He said, okay. He says, and why don't you take it with me? And I said, it sounds really a lot like it would be wonderful, but I want you to think about that too, because even though there are other families that are participating in the dojo, it will change the dynamic of the class for you. So think about that too. So Michael comes back to me almost 48 hours to the minute. And he's, I want to do it, and I want you to take it with me. I said, that's it. He goes, you're in it for a year. And so
I love your awareness and sensitivity that you brought in there, because those are very accurate, correct from my perspective, statements of what you should do and say in that situation, and I love it. That's exactly what I would do if the situation arose. I've got a black belt, I suppose you would call. We had black t-shirt in Kung Fu.
Okay, great.
And that was an incredible journey for me too. And that's some incredible stories around that as well. But yeah, anything else?
Well, no, it's just fabulous training. And actually I use a lot of the concepts with that. And when I'm working with people, as far as, the discipline and the repetition, but also coming in with a fresh mind.
Did that group of karate bring in a lot of the philosophy, the yin yang, the other concepts that are more esoteric?
Well, maybe not in so many words, but as far as working with the energy, either you're blocking or you're bringing it in to work with it and then sending it back out. It's a wonderful exercise in actually understanding energy principles without talking about energy principles, right?
Okay. The interesting thing, the way I started was, I saw Bruce Lee movies and got totally enamored. Then I thought, let me go do some martial arts in town. So I went to the local karate class. I saw them going, and I was so appalled that I was put off martial arts for years afterwards, compared to Kung Fu, which is soft and gentle and flowing. This brutal rah, rah, rah stuff absolutely got my goats. So it absolutely threw me for many, many years, until when I was at university, there was this guy doing these beautiful forms on the field, and I went up to him and I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Oh, I'm practicing my Kung Fu kata." I said, "Oh, that's really nice. It's beautiful." I said, "What level are you?" He said, "No, I'm actually an instructor." I said, "Oh, great. Where's your school?" He said, "I don't have one. I've just arrived here in the city." And I said, "Well, I'll be your first student." And he said, "Well, okay." And from that day, we started training, and we trained for 6 months with our hands. And after that, he said, "Well, this is a full contact martial arts sport." So we put on gloves and he started sparring with our hands. Mm-hmm. And he hit me hard in the face, and I went down like this on the ground, and he put his hands together. He bowed over me when I was on the ground, and he said, "Louis, the object exercise, get your eyes back on the target as soon as possible. This is going to happen often." Mm-hmm. And that was one of a phenomenal lesson which I learned and applied to every aspect of my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Keep your eye on it. Exactly.
When you get knocked down, how quickly can you get you up again and moving?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a marvelous. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask. So, how did you? I mean, obviously, you had the principles while you were nursing, but how did that go into transformational coaching?
Well, it's very much connected, because I work with people in regard to the energy principles, the universal laws, and the reprogramming of the neural pathways to actually pattern them in a more positive direction. You're never going to, eliminate those saboteur voices, those voices that say, "I don't think you're ready. Mm-hmm. I think you need another certificate." Right?
I think Anne-Marie can relate to that. Huh?
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah, that little voice was always popping in. Go, do it.
But you can diminish those voices, right? And so you can reprogram yourself to think differently. And then that, of course, allows you to become more quickly, like, who do you want to become? What do you want to be doing? Where do you want to be going? Right?
Absolutely.
It's very important stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you also have you have a webinar and you have some classes coming up. Talk about those for a bit.
I do. But before that, I want to just expand a little bit about using the term mind diet.
Ooh, right? Okay. Go for it.
Right, because I think it's important for people to understand that what you feed your mind dictates how you operate. And people seem to understand the term mind diet, so I like to pass that around, because people do understand about diet, right? And so obviously most people think of a nutritional diet, but I think your mind diet is the first diet to be paying attention to, because that also dictates what you're going to make your choices for in your nutritional diet.
Very good point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it all starts in the mind. No matter what it is we're talking about, it always has to start in the mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Your thoughts dictate your life.
Yeah, they really do. They really do.
Yeah, I know. So, yes, I am doing a webinar next Monday at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and that is entitled "Revealing Your Brilliance." And so that will be about the sunshine quotient and some of the basics of neuroscience, and what are some action steps that you can take to move yourself forward. It's a very quick little workshop, about a half hour, 40, and then another 15 minutes for a Q&A for people that are interested in dropping in and maybe picking up a little bit of info. And I have a couple of classes that I'm offering. The first one is Your Sage Brain and Working with the Laws. And that is about the reprogramming of the neural pathways and the basics of 11 universal laws. And that includes the law of non-resistance, the law of compensation, increase, success. How fun is that?
Mm.
And then the other class that I'm offering is Life Mastery 2.0. And that's a longer course. It's 24 weeks and it's in-depth study. And actually for people to actually determine what their values are, what's important to them. And then once they actually establish that, then creating the vision and moving forward and working with a specific mind training. And that works with 4 weeks on each area of focus. And that deals with intention and health, abundance and manifestation, and love and transformation. Because what I love about all of these programs, it's all about raising people's awareness on how energy principles and universal laws can work for them.
It's funny because you described it as a long course, and the title is Life Mastery 2.0. And I thought to myself, yeah, that's a real long one. That goes on the entire lifetime. It does never actually stop. But you somehow managed to narrow it down to a 24-week course. So congratulations on that.
Well, but it's a great start for people because it allows them enough time to create some habits so that then they can go on their own. When they're more confident, they can
and
be
to
more
grasp.
independent. Pardon?
And also to grasp with clarity the philosophy of understanding who we are, where we're going, why we're here.
Right.
How to work with the laws.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I find that clarity is fleeting and not concreted into the beings that I have bumped into in myself. A lot of people have got bits and pieces of the puzzle, but they haven't got much of it worked out at all.
I think one of the things that people have trouble grasping is that, the energy is always working on an upward spiral and it's always pulling us. And we're always receiving more information constantly. So the decision that a person makes today may be a good decision. However, things are always changing. So that same decision may not be as useful or, make the same application, make the same changes that they believe are going to happen in even just 2 weeks from now, because things are always changing.
Absolutely.
I liken it to, if people aren't really understanding about the upward pull and the upward spiral of the energy and everything is always in motion constantly, I say just think of the train as always leaving the station. So do you want to be on the train or not?
It's a good way to describe it.
Everybody has to find a way to work with this energy. It's what I call learning the rules of the game.
Which I find to be comforting to know that there are rules to the game, because I remember when I was younger figuring there must be a rule book somewhere, but I'd never seen it. So, to learn there actually were rules and that they made sense was quite reassuring, to be perfectly honest, when I first, encountered all this stuff. Because for the longest time, none of it made any sense to me. Not the way it was explained anyway.
Yeah, I love that profoundness I learned when the answer to life, the universe, and everything was 42.
Yes, Douglas Adams did have an interesting take on it.
Well, the other thing that's interesting is that I believe that there are as many perspectives on the planet as there are people.
Absolutely.
So everything that's being interpreted is through their lens of their experience and how they're bringing it in to use it.
And as teachers, we learn to appreciate all the different perspectives which is incredibly important. Otherwise, you can't really help many people. You have to be able to kind of get into their heads and understand where the way they're seeing it and what lenses they're seeing it. Mm-hmm. The thing that I've often said is I'm very confident and I really understand who I am and where I'm going and all the rest of it. But if you come up with something clearer and better in the next second, I'll drop my old belief structure in a heartbeat and I'll be ready to run with a new one. Mm-hmm. without even a second's thought about it. Because, you know, the amount I know is this much. The amount I don't know is infinite.
Oh, absolutely. And the beauty of having that kind of perspective is that it's very liberating.
Mm-hmm. It's very liberating. Mm-hmm. And people sense it and respect it.
Yeah. Mm.
Mm-hmm. The thing that I find to be most interesting and challenging about this whole dynamic that we're talking about, this absorbing of energy, absorbing of information through energy, learning to interact with it day by day and realizing that the answer I'm coming up with today is going to be different from the one I come up with tomorrow. And like you were saying, the fact that there is at least one perspective for every person. I think what it's actually doing is it's giving us many perspectives. I think we now have so many more perspectives per person than we did, say, even 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I think it's actually increasing geometrically, which I find to be really exciting because I know, and this is something that I've learned just directly from doing this podcast for 10 plus years, but the more perspectives that you get, not only do you have a better understanding of yourself and of the universe and how things work and so forth, but you also feel better about it. Oh. And when you feel better about it, and that's what I think is happening with more and more people, despite all the, I mean, there's plenty of, contrast and polarity, as we like to call it. There's lots of stuff going on. There's a lot of stuff that people get angry about and frustrated and all that kind of stuff. But with all of the people who are discovering new perspectives, even if they aren't aware that they're doing it, I think it's just so exciting because that means all of the people who are getting more perspectives are also expanding themselves. They're helping to expand the human race. They're helping to expand the existence of all that is. I mean, it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger exponentially. I get excited about that.
Oh, I do too. I love talking to people about this.
Catherine, you have a question from one of the online listeners. They said, Jeffrey says, where are the rules coming from and who made them?
Well, the rules, it's interesting because the rules are, they're energy principles and universal laws in play all the time. There's more going on than just gravity, the law of gravity and the law of electricity, right? Mm. And so, for instance, as an example, the law of receiving requires you to give first. To keep that energy going, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing that's always in play is polarity. And it's positive and negative. And it works, it's not good or bad. It works like a battery. So for instance, there is that if you have a desire for something, that has a positive charge to it. In order for that desire to actually come to you, you have to have the expectation that that desire will come to fruition, and that expectation has a negative charge. Mm-hmm. And again, it's not good or bad. It works like a battery. And so you have to have both of these electrical charges in play for that to happen for you.
When I was young, I knew that there was a great secret because, at the age of 8, I said to my mom, what's truth, love, and God really about? And she went, I realized I had to find out for myself that one of the big things I did discover was that if, without light, there'd be no darkness. Without a valley, there'd be no mountain. Without an up, there'd be no down, blah, blah, blah. I knew there was a profound understanding in that all, but I didn't know how it manifested in a human. So then along came Abraham Hicks and said, when you know what you don't want, you have a better idea what you do want. And that's when I suddenly realized, that's how the contrast manifests in a human.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because if there's that example of hot and cold, right? And it's all temperature, hot and cold. And so if you're cold and you go in front of the fire and you focus on getting warm in front of the fire,
Mm-hmm.
you feel warm, but that doesn't mean the coldness has disappeared, right? You're just not focusing on that.
Yeah, I've often said that, if you were happy all the time, you wouldn't know what happiness was.
Exactly.
Mm.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Everything is connected, right?
Is related to the contrast, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to say hi to Maria, or the Maralise is her real name. We've been chatting on the phone today.
Oh, good.
She was on the show almost a year ago to the day, so it's kind of appropriate that she popped in today. Yeah,
cool.
Which is pretty cool. Yeah, and she went through a rather remarkable healing in a special event that we put on in January, where she had been dealing with. Oh, sure, it's just going to pop right out of my head.
Is it fibromyalgia?
Fibromyalgia, yeah, that's it, right?
Yeah.
She'd been dealing with that for like 30, 35 years, and in the midst of our event, all of a sudden it was gone. That was pretty cool.
That was incredible.
Yeah. You were there for that. I remember that. Yeah.
I was. Yeah, it was beautiful.
Yeah.
It's still pain-free.
Yeah. Yeah. All these months later, and she just keeps celebrating it every single day.
A year later.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. Did we actually answer Jeffrey's questions? What we talked about was beautiful, but I'm not sure if we actually answered the questions.
Where did the rules come from?
Where did the energy come from?
Anne-Marie's answer came from Anne-Marie.
The energy came from me dropping my headphones.
Well, it's a question, right? Where did it all come from?
No, it's a nice way of answering the question, and I appreciate it.
I think my answer is, where did it come from? It came from thought. Thought was what originated all of it. And then over time, it just built and built and built and built. You keep building and building and building, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
And
that's
did
what we
you think that up?
Apparently. look how it all worked out. I mean, I'm telling you. No,
I think that, gosh, does that have something to do with perspective?
Absolutely.
Use it or lose it.
Yeah. It has everything to do with perspective. In fact, perspective, I think it'd be fair to say that was one of the first inventions. Developing the idea, okay, here's a viewpoint, here's a perspective, as opposed to that perspective over here or this one over here. That all by itself, that just started the whole thing going. Just
Catherine, I'm guessing you read our favorite book, Walter and I's favorite book, Illusions by Richard Bach.
No, I haven't read it.
You haven't read that? Oh, you got to read that. Yeah.
I'll make myself a note.
I would recommend it.
Are you familiar with Richard Bach? He was the author of Jonathan Livingston's Seagull.
Yeah.
Well, Illusions was his second book, and it was actually better than Jonathan Livingston's Seagull.
It actually wasn't his second book, but we won't go there.
Well, what was the second one?
No, he made many in the before about flying and planes.
Oh, you're right. Oh, I'd forgotten about that one. Yes. You're right. There was a second one. Yes. But it came out shortly after that. But you're right. I can't remember what the name of that book was.
No, I can't remember either. But
wasn't one of his stronger ones.
It's so interesting about inventions, right? Because one invention opens up more and then more possibilities, and then there's another invention, and it just goes and goes, and it's fabulous.
Catherine, we got 10 minutes, and I wanted to cover something as you're into the neuroscience. Have you ever heard of Dr. Alan Watkins?
Yes.
Okay. So he I watched a YouTube video, a TED Talk recently, and it's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating, because he studied it and he puts electrodes on, and he says it's not breathing in different steps. It's actually breathing very consistently in exactly the same way that actually calms everything. And, listening to all the different yogis and all the different techniques out there, a lot of them are stepped and this and that and the other. And they've shown that very specifically, if you do it consistently, just focusing on your breath, that is what really calms the whole mind down. But another thing we brought in so many little really gems. But it's all based on science and actually testing them and doing live experiments with guys on stage there. He said to the guy, you okay, or are you good with maths? He said, yes. And then he starts stressing him out. He says, I'm just going to give you something simple, 323 minus 3. And then he starts putting pressure on him, and he shows how the whole brain, because he's connected the whole thing to his brainwaves. And he goes all over the place, and he says, you need to get your physiology right first before you can calm the brain, before you can start making positive decisions, etc. So you've got to get that whole cycle right. And the way you do it is by focusing on breathing. And on all the other thing he brought up, which was fascinating, is that the electromagnetic pulse that comes out of the heart area is many, many, many times more powerful than what's happening in the brain, even when you're completely wired on. So he says, when you breathe consistently in a nice rhythm and you focus in on your heart area, then you really, it can take you to another level. I can send everybody the link, if they want to that video, but there's very interesting information there.
Well, because there is that connection, right? That's body, spirit, mind connection, getting it all to work together and understanding that. And the research that's going on right now between the brain and the heart coherence is really wonderful. So between that and Dr. Joe Dispenza and what's going on with his research, it's very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, Bruce Lipton's in on that. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What Dr. Alan Watkins was also saying, that I found interesting, because I've said it often on the show, your thoughts affect your emotions affect your thoughts, and it's a cycle going on. And often people try to, specifically the psychologists, they like to split the mind and the emotions. And he was saying there's a difference between feeling, somebody else was saying it on our show, Walt, a difference between feeling and emotion. And he was talking a bit about that as well. Because I didn't quite get that. So there's lots of things that really appealed to me about what he said, and I'm not often impressed by those kind of videos, etc. But also what I enjoyed about this presentation was his real confidence. That whole presentation, there's a genuine baseline, complete confidence in it, and I was like, wow, I like this, because I enjoy people that are really, really confident. I don't look at them as arrogant. I really appreciate that, because I don't think there's enough confident people in this world. I really don't.
I think one of the reasons for that is that so many people feel disconnected between the three, what I call the three facets, right? The body, mind, spirit. And I believe that you have to have the integration of all of these together. Like as an example, as a precious stone, right? If all the facets are connected, then the stone shines very brilliantly, right? And I think it's the same way with us. If we're not working in concert between these three elements, then I think that leaves ground for a lot of confusion, self-doubt, all of those things that contribute to people not being confident and not having the not only the confidence but the vision to move forward, to be confident in what it is that they want and think that that's okay, right?
And if you're teaching how to balance those three, which most people have no clue about, excellent. Excellent.
Yeah. It's important to talk to people about self-care and what that really entails, and it's totally different than the commercialized version of self-care, right?
Mm-hmm. Talk about that for a moment. Let's actually delve into that a bit.
I mean, it's nice to, go for the manicure and go for the massage and, these things and whatnot, but so many people equate self-care with the tangible things they can buy, the 10 minutes here, the little treat for lunch or whatever that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But self-care really entails a lot of what we're talking about and delving into the understanding of how we all really operate and how the mind does influence how the body operates, because your thoughts affect your body physiologically.
Mm-hmm.
And not having that understanding and giving yourself the time to care for yourself fully is how I view it. You're doing yourself a disservice.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Alan Watson put it in a way I'd never heard before, and I've always loved something that's new. And it's so simple, anybody can get this. He says, if you go out and get your pedicure, manicure, etc., but you're still thinking negative thoughts, you're harming yourself. Okay, so you've really got to understand that you need to get the synchronicity between getting these rest phases and keeping your thoughts based on what you want, not what you don't want. And even if you're going running and you're doing something really, really positive, but if you're thinking negative thoughts, you're harming yourself, and vice versa. So if you're really negative or something, and you do positive things like breathing and all the rest of it, but if you're still doing it with negative thoughts, you're not going to go anywhere. So, the whole thing, it was really, really simple about getting your thoughts in alignment with your actions.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes you need that pattern interrupt, regardless of what that is, what works for you. When you get into that negative loop of thinking, it's very easy to interrupt that with physical exercise, but having an awareness that that's what you're doing because you want to pivot to a more positive way of thinking. And absolutely. And on the emotional vibrational scale, it's very easy to see, right? And I think the visualization for people sometimes is helpful.
Do you teach the emotional guidance scale?
I bring that up because I think it's easy for people to visualize more of where they are in their thinking if they have a visual of what the scale looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way Abraham Hicks teaches it. If you're depressed and you go into revenge, you feel relief and release. If you go from revenge to rage, you feel relief and release. If you go from rage to frustration, you feel relief and release. Mm-hmm. If you go from frustration to I don't care, you have relief and release. If you go from I don't care to hope, you have relief and release. And it's really, really interesting that, if you're really depressed, don't tell them to be happy. The gap vibrationally between them all is just too big.
Right. And the wonderful thing about hope is, it's a bridge, right? And so I was listening to Dr. Dan Tomasulo talk about this a couple of weeks ago, and he writes about hope. And one of his books is Learned Hopefulness. And he says it's the only positive emotion that requires a negative emotion to be used as a catalyst.
Explain that.
In order for hope to come into play, you need a negative emotion, like you're talking about, if you're angry or if you're depressed or if you're feeling...
Are you going back to the concept I was bringing up earlier? If you're happy all the time, you wouldn't know you were happy.
It's very much related to that, right? Mm-hmm. And so the negative emotion is used as a catalyst to initiate the emotion of hope, which will then get you to a higher vibrational emotion as well.
was trying to think why they used hope as the only one, because all of them are relation to change in vibration. So I was thinking maybe it's because I don't care is probably still considered in the negative, and hope is the first one from the negative to the positive. I don't know. I was just curious as to why they thought that.
Well, that's the way I interpreted it as well. That it's the one that moves you in the direction of a more positive emotion.
Mm-hmm. But from hope, you go to expectation, or at least in the Abraham Hicks scale. It doesn't really matter which one. You got the Scientology scale. You got 101 different emotional scales out there. But, that's a contrast as well. And there's a huge gap between hope and expectation. It's massive. Vibrationally.
It's true. It's true. I know for myself, I've been finding myself really, really simplifying. So, just today, for instance, I was out taking my usual daily walk, and I found my mind wandering in a direction I didn't really want to wander into, and I didn't like the feeling associated with it, and I wanted to get out of it quickly. And I could have used any number of tools, including, climbing the emotional guidance scale. And I just chose to do something that I've been doing a lot lately. I just chose to focus on my heart center. That was it. Mm-hmm. That was the whole exercise. And I've been doing that a lot lately. And maybe it's because of the work I've been doing on myself for years now, but I'm finding that to be like the easiest one of all. Just, okay, not feeling good, focus on the heart center. Didn't like what happened over there, focus on the heart center. Don't like that conversation, focus on the heart center. It works beautifully. Mm-hmm. It's so freaking simple.
As Abram says, Walt, it's easier to teach somebody not to think than it is to
yes.
on positivity.
This is true. It's very, very true. Yeah. Well, I have to say, Catherine, this has been a fascinating conversation. Really, really cool. Tell us again about the classes and the webinars and how people can sign up for that if they're interested.
Should I put my contact information in the chat?
Sure. Yeah. I'll make sure we'll include it in the show notes as well.
Oh, okay. The webinar is next Monday at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and it's called Revealing Your Brilliance. And it's a half-hour presentation with 15-minute Q&A. And it's about the Sunshine Quotient and the Sunshine Quotient mindfulness and breathing technique, the basics of neuroscience, and what are some action steps that you can take to move yourself forward. And the classes are Working with Your Sage Brain and the Laws, and Life Mastery 2.0.
Brilliant. Love it. And how do they sign up for it?
I talk to everybody before they come in to take a class with me, because I want to ensure that they're getting into a class that's the most beneficial for them, because I want to know what their needs are and what their desired outcomes are. And that way I can roll it into what I'm providing so the class will serve them. Sure. Because I work with people in the class, but for the people that are in the class, I also meet with them individually once a month to make sure that they're getting everything that they are there for.
So therefore they need to be able to reach out to you. How do they find you?
Yeah, I'll put my email in the chat.
All right. So we'll include that in the show notes as well. The email is definitely going to be the best way for people to reach out. So that's what we'll do. Yeah. And again, I want to thank you for taking the time, for sharing with us. This has been a fabulous conversation. One thing I want to mention to you that I make the practice to do, because I'm sure we're not the only podcast that you've ever appeared on, and plus you have your own programs and so forth that you do, and many, many ways that you reach out to people who you'll never meet, you'll never see in many cases. But I think it's important to recognize that you, like so many people, do help people that you'll never meet and you never see. So on their behalf, thank you for what you do. Thank you for what you've been continuing to do. Thank you for what you will continue to do.
Well, thank you. It's been a real honor to be here with all of you, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
We appreciate you as well. Unfortunately, Anne-Marie's internet got the better of her, but we'll catch her again next week. Louis, as usual, by the way, I loved your questions today. You're usually really good, but today's questions were really wonderful. So well done there, guy.
Thanks, Walt.
Yeah, good stuff. Love it. So thank you guys very much. Thank you, podcast listeners everywhere. We will see you all next time here on LOA.
Take care, everybody.
Take
Goodbye,
care.
everybody.
Bye-bye.